How many times have you heard of someone saying, I'm going to a New Year's Eve show with insert electronic artist here?
Some of these DJs are playing more shows in the year than there are days in the year.
Major artists now in the pop sphere, Marshmello and Chainsmokers, that's all born from these artists.
You can really see the evolution of streaming just in this catalog alone.
Even my grandmother knows who Skrillex is. Wolfgang Gartner, Skrillex, Deadmau5. I mean, when you talk about big names in the electronic scene, these are the names that I feel people will talk about in their household, right? The household name. The only people you might be missing there is Moby. Everyone knows who Skrillex is.
Yeah.
Even my grandmother knows who Skrillex is, and I can't imagine that she's listening to Devil's Den. Yeah. I can't imagine my 80-year-old grandmother is listening to that track very often, but I guarantee you she knows who Skrillex is.
To me, these three names are kind of just some of the poster childs of the 2010s, right? I know electronic music's been pretty popular since, probably even further back than the 90s, but I feel like the 90s is sort of when it got its big mainstream start at the club scene and different sort of subgenres. 2010 specifically is when this electro-house dubstep really took off.
So it pivoted to mainstream,
Yeah.
And that's when everyone knows who these artists are, and it really blew up. I mean, it's even led to major artists now in the pop sphere, Marshmello and Chainsmokers. That's all born from these artists, he said, in the 2010 era, bringing the genre to mainstream.
Totally. I mean, even talking about one of the last listings we discussed, the Tate McRae one.
Yeah.
Huge song right now. Greedy has a ton of electronic elements in the production, which just goes to show how much influence these guys have on not only their specific space, but different pockets you're talking about in, popular music across the board.
Yeah, and we could talk about, again, my grandmother who knows who Skrillex is. But these are also, global artists. I had a buddy who went and saw a Deadmau5 show in Thailand, some huge festival, awesome big thing, right? So it's not just US markets, it's not just, traditional domestic popularity, like it's, again, global phenomenon.
I think more than almost any other genre of music, the electronic music scene is so global and international. Just because it's so much about melody and rhythm and the BPM, where we've talked about this before with the David Guetta listing, people want to have fun and dance and get out and just have a good time, especially, the stresses of everyday life. And because the production elements of these songs are such the baseline and staple of the music itself, it really is language agnostic.
Oh, yeah.
Music is the universal language, but when you take, for the most part, vocals out of the equation, it's really anyone from anywhere across the globe can appreciate these songs. And I don't know, looking at the earnings that you're going to discuss a little bit more in depth, I'm pretty sure a lot of it is from live performance. And I think that's where these electronic artists and songs really make an impact in the earnings, but also because, you look at a lot of these DJs and a lot of them, their show schedule is so jam-packed. Some of these DJs are playing more shows in the year than there are days in the year, which is just crazy. Literally, they could play an afternoon set at one of the pool clubs in Vegas and then play the nightclub the same day. And then, jet set off to LA in, that lull period at night and then play another set during sunrise at some random desert, right? So their schedule is so jam-packed, and the fact that you could potentially earn from some of these live performances is pretty crazy.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring up the live stuff, because that's probably my favorite part of when looking at the earnings of this catalog in particular, is that the live for even tracks that are, 10 years old is still so relevant. I mean, just in the last quarter of the data that we have here, there was a live performance in France. It added 30% to the quarterly average just in one period, because there was a live show. And we said these guys are performing all over the place. And the rest of the earnings is baseline from streaming, right? People are still just listening to this stuff because they have the music, whether it's just at home blasting it or in their car on the way to the show, right? So you have your baseline of streaming, which, we've talked about this again and again and again because it's so important, is what you want to look for. Then add the upside from the live performances, which can be so material, especially for artists in a genre that's so built on the live experience. How many times have you heard of someone saying, I'm going to a New Year's Eve show with insert electronic artist here, right? I feel every year I hear about a different show experience that, but you see it. It's directly in the data here. Yeah. And then the other part of that, streaming live bucket is that, a big portion of it comes from international. So it's spread across the globe.
The main person on this listing, Wolfgang Gartner, he really had his peak in popularity around 2009, 2012 on the live side, where he was, one of the biggest DJs in the world, constantly ranked on DJ Magazine's top DJs in the world list. There's this website called Beatport, which is super big in the electronic music scene. And he had 8 total songs reach #1 on the Beatport charts. But you were saying before how big the live side is. He was playing and headlining so many festivals such as Electric Forest, Coachella, EDC, Ultra Music Festival around this time period. And since himself and artists Skrillex and Deadmau5, who he has some of these collaborations with, are still touring today, and the fact that a lot of DJs will oftentimes play other DJs and producers' songs in their own sets.
Oh, yeah.
That's such a popular thing. You see whether they mix in some sort of variation, bootleg version of their song, you're still going to be earning from the live performance anytime some of the classics in this catalog are played, whether it's a Skrillex show, whether it's a Deadmau5 show, whether it's, he said, someone like a Marshmello or Martin Garrix show. So really, there is really no limitation on the live performance side, which is super cool.
How many Grammys did Skrillex win in those early 2010 years, right? Those kinds of tracks, that kind of clout, you said it permeates into other artists, new artists who want to capitalize on that popularity, even that nostalgia for a lot of people who might be at that show. Oh my God, I remember this song, and they mix it into the thing, and that generates the royalty here, right? So it's the compounding effect of that live aspect is kind of unmeasurable, especially as these artists develop their own labels, bring new artists into the fold, and continue to expand their musical presence, right? It just keeps growing on itself.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that's really cool about the electronic scene is I feel it's a lot more open than other genres, where in a lot of other genres, artists or bands get really pissed when someone samples their song. It's in electronic music, it's, hey, I'm going to play your song in this set. Don't even need to ask, whatever.
And they're sick.
They're all playing back-to-back sets together for like a lot of time. It really is just, it's almost the open source of music, right? They're really sharing is so prevalent. And I think that's what creates this amazing community of people that really are listening to these songs year after year. And I think the nostalgia factor you talk about is pretty interesting too. These songs are really from the 2010s, which isn't too long ago. But at the same time, there's been such advances in music distribution where we can look at the earnings and the streams and see on the streaming side where I think, if I'm not mistaken, this catalog has 50% of earnings coming from streaming, and it's growing. An oftentimes forgotten streaming platform is Pandora, right? Pandora was one of the first big streaming platforms, but today we don't really hear about it too often. But what's really interesting is I think 3 out of the 4 top songs in this listing have by far the most streams of any streaming platform on Pandora. So you can really see the evolution of streaming just in this catalog alone, which is crazy to think about. So much has changed in just 10 to 15 years in the music streaming space. But you can see how at those early opening stages of these songs being released in 2010, 2011, so many of those streams came from Pandora, where that was the go-to place. And now today, they have the all-time highs, and they're still getting a lot of revenue from that platform. But we can see now with the big editorial ecosystem that a platform Spotify has, where, the artists in this listing, Skrillex, Deadmau5, have hundreds of thousands of followers in their artist-specific playlists, which some of these songs are in. A lot more nowadays, the revenue is getting driven by Spotify. So I think it's really cool to just see that evolution of streaming in this listing itself.
Yeah. There's a clear line when you look at the earnings by source, and you filter it down to just the streaming stuff, just by the digital service provider, just the DSP. You have Pandora leader, Pandora leader, Pandora leader, Spotify leader, Spotify leader, Spotify leader. It's a clear shift, and Pandora still is a big contributor to the earnings, but yeah, very, very clear shift to Spotify as the leader. And it's funny because you look at the earnings overall, because the peak of these songs you have to release, Pandora was the biggest service. Pandora still is the biggest earnings contributor all in for these tracks when you look at it by source, which is really interesting, because you'd think that Spotify would eclipse that, but still hasn't.
Yeah, I guess people that are listening to the electronic dance music are still, maybe there's something special about Pandora, that the main the mainstream streaming audience isn't really grasping these days. Or maybe it is just the nostalgia factor of having those song-specific radio stations or things of that nature.
I view it as a testament to the staying power. Right. Yeah. So one phenomenon that we often see with radio is when stuff reaches a certain age, it becomes, indoctrinated into a genre or a decade. And so radio play becomes really consistent because it's in these set radio stations. That phenomenon we see happening in Pandora here, right? These were songs that were massive hits in the 2010 decade. So very feasible to believe that this would have solidified as, a staple of the 2010 music listening scene, gets into those decade playlists that, people could be listening to, again, for the nostalgia factor, or it could be in a classic EDM playlist or even a current EDM playlist, right? Any of those could contribute to it. But it's all part of that radio ecosystem, which is different today as it was, 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, I think touching further on that a little bit, when we're looking at Spotify specifically, because we can see those sort of daily shifts in streaming activity, it is interesting to note that Spotify, we talked about before, places such an emphasis on these older catalog songs when it's pushing for the algorithmic playlist. Your user profile specific algorithmic, Discover Weekly playlist, or just your individual radio playlist based on your listening habits. They really put a lot of focus on those older songs. And since Wolfgang Gartner was such a staple in the 2010s, a lot of his music is being featured in any of these Skrillex or Deadmau5 or Avicii, Martin Garrix, any of these artist-specific algorithmic playlists, because the staying power is so prevalent. You can even see this from just the consistency of streams per month in the last few years on Spotify. I was looking at the biggest song in this catalog, Devil's Den, and the discrepancy between the average and the lowest week in the past year is so close to the average, it's actually ridiculous, showing that there aren't random spikes in growth. So the average weekly streams for this song the past year was 43,000, and the lowest week was 38,800. That's not too far off the average. So that's such a good thing to have in royalty catalog. And even if you go further, since 2021, for the monthly streams, the average monthly Spotify streams is 201,000. And the lowest month in the past 3 years was 170K, which isn't that far off.
Still right up there.
Yeah. And, when you look at the editorial ecosystem, these songs don't have the craziest amount of editorial support, but they do have those, appearances on the This Is artist specific playlists. But one of the ones that I thought was pretty interesting, since we're talking nostalgia, was 2011 Dance Party. That is literally just, we could put that as the title of this video right now. And it's hilarious that Spotify has an editorial playlist with that name. And it has thousands, in the 5 figures followers. So people are definitely appreciative of that kind of music and this kind of music and this sound, and still listening to it consistently today.
I mean, 2011, that's when America came out. That's another one of the top contributors in the catalog. Like, that was the release year for that song.
Yeah, and that song itself was probably the most notable of his Wolfgang Gartner solo non-collaborative songs in this listing. And just the last one that I talked about, Devil's Den, the consistency on Spotify specifically is so strong. In the past year, the average weekly streams was 13,500, and the lowest week was 12,600. It's been really
negligible difference.
Drop-offs at all, and that's pretty exciting to see. And I think a lot of times now we place such an emphasis on social media impact and performance. This catalog has virtually no performance on TikTok, which is pretty crazy considering how consistent it is, but also is sort of a testament to the core fan base, the people, the audience that is listening to these songs. So it just goes to show that these are all repeat listeners and the retention is so strong, and you're not going to see this random spike in growth and a huge fall off. You're getting a super consistent catalog, which is super cool. And, let's just say there is some random viral trend that goes off. You could expect
it's just upside, baby.
Exactly.
Just up.
You don't have to worry about some TikTok trend from 3 months ago that's going to decrease the earnings, because that hasn't even happened yet. But the earnings are so consistent and the streams are so consistent, and that's just testament to the staying power we discussed of these artists.
Yeah, I mean, we'll show the full life of earnings, and you'll be able to see clear as day. You have your drop from the 2011, 2013 era, and then it's just basically a line. And that line right there, that consistency, that follows from the streaming. It's all the streaming regularity that you're talking about, those hardly negligible fluctuations in weekly listenership, that's what leads to that line. And that's why an older catalog, this so centric to streaming, is so heavily sought after. It's just consistent income, which is kind of the golden goose of royalty assets in a way.
Definitely. So yeah, if you're interested in placing a bid on this asset, you can check it out. We'll list the URL to the direct listing below in the video description at royaltyexchange.com.
Streaming is what you want. It's consistent, especially when you can see the streaming trends, which are clear as day as this one. And then you bank a little bit of upside from the live stuff. That's why in the last year, you see a small uptick from your average just from the live stuff. But keep that in the back pocket. This is one to look at. Take a look at the earnings. You won't regret it.
Sounds good. All right, John, thank you so much. And if you're a musician and want a free catalog valuation, you can DM us on any social platform, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, you name it. Yeah.
If you take a look at this catalog, you got questions, hit us up too. Happy to answer them.
Definitely. This one's been a fun one, and hopefully we get some more electronic music in the future.
Till next time.
Yeah. Peace.